Aha, take two. Okay, sorry about that. There seemed to be a little bit of a delay on Twitter, but it seems to be working now. I'm not going to take up too much of your time today. There was just a couple of things that I wanted to discuss online today. Again, let me know if you have any issues hearing me at all. There's obviously a lot going on today, especially with what happened in Afghanistan today with the explosion at the airport. There's a lot going on. But as you know, this week, I'm sharing this really fast. As you know, this week, voting rights passed in the House. And what was interesting to me was kind of the first reaction that a lot of people said to me was, it was like immediately gloom and doom, right? It was immediately like, well, it's not going to pass the Senate. And I do understand that feeling, and I understand why people would want to say that right away. But I'd also like people to know that sometimes we do have to take a moment to celebrate when policy actually passes. Anything, House, Senate these days. And I know that it is going to be really difficult for it to pass in the Senate. We know this. And it's going to be tough. And one of the reasons why it's going to have a tough time passing, obviously, is because of the filibuster. And we know that not every use of the filibuster has been used for racist intent or for prejudicial intent, but it has been used for those purposes. And because it hasn't always been used for racial discrimination, that kind of gives cover to people who have used it for racial discrimination, like Strom Thurmond or Mitch McConnell, right? They are using it for discrimination. They are using it for prejudicial intent. So we know that. And one of the things, and I talk about this a lot, I talk about narrative, is that we're still not being very clear on the fact that this is what Mitch McConnell is doing. By preventing a vote on voting rights, that this is prejudice, right? Because you have to look at it logically. Who does voter suppression target? Does it target white wealthy voters? We know that it doesn't. We know that it targets Black voters, Latino voters, disabled voters, senior voters, Native voters. It tends to target voters that vote within the Democratic Party. And they are usually from a group that has been marginalized in our country through bad policy. So we know that. Because if not, they wouldn't have a problem putting voting rights through. And I watched a reporter ask Mitch McConnell, do you think it's prejudicial that you still have the filibuster in place? To me, she teed him up to, of course, swing that back out and say, of course it's not prejudicial. Well, we know that it is. And she should have said, the filibuster has been used for racial discrimination. And right now we know that voting rights is something that aids all of us. And it helps everybody. It helps Republicans too. Voting rights is something that helps everybody. But we know that voter suppression targets those that are in what would be considered minority groups or disenfranchised groups. She could have just said it to him in that way. And then Mitch McConnell would have had a harder time answering it. She teed him up just to say, of course not. He goes, even historians agree that there's no racial intent in some of the filibuster. I mean, he lied. So if we want to get voting rights through, we need to start changing the conversation on what the filibuster does, the history of it. We know that Strom Thurmond used it to try to block the 1957 Civil Rights Act. He thought it was going to destroy our country. We also know, and it's been written many times, that Republicans have said they're trying to drag this country back to 1954. I don't think they are. I think they're trying to drag us back to 1864, to be honest, right? So we have to be more passionate about the fact that the filibuster has to change. Has to change. We're never going to get 60 people in the Senate right now to end debate and to bring the vote to the floor. It's not going to happen. Right now, as far as Republicans are concerned, for the John Lewis Act, the only person that's considering joining the Democrats is Lisa Murkowski. She's the only one. I know that Sinema and Joe Manchin have said that they would support it, would support voting for it. So that's good, but they're not for ending the filibuster. So to me, the best choice is let's go back to the talking filibuster. We know that filibuster has not been a part of our entire American history. It is not in our Constitution. It has changed over the years. Thanks, Aaron Burr. You suck, right? This is the reason why we have the filibuster in the first place, right? The guy that shot Hamilton. So we need to be more passionate about talking about reforming the filibuster right now, getting it to the talking filibuster, changing it. It was still slow debate. It was still slow the process, but it would get us somewhere, okay? But I still want us to celebrate the fact that it passed, that HR 4 passed the House. I think we should celebrate it. A lot of people worked hard for that. Okay. The next thing that I want to talk about, and a couple people saw me discuss it today, was there was this thing called Soho NoHo that happened. It's if you don't live in New York and you're watching this, Soho is a neighborhood in New York City. It's south of Houston. That's why it's called Soho. NoHo is north of Houston. Houston is a street. And for people who first come to New York, they always mispronounce the street. They think it's called Houston. It's not. It's Houston. And this is an area of town that hasn't been rezoned in over 3 decades. Okay, this part of Soho NoHo, and NoHo is part of my district. And NoHo and Soho are really interesting in the sense that it's incredibly white. It's almost 80% white. It's incredibly wealthy. People like to think of it as an artist district. There are artists that live there. They tend to be successful artists. Okay, no knock against them. That's wonderful. But it also has, it also is one of these areas that wants to call itself historic. But really, to me, Soho is already what Maloney says it's going to become, which she said it's going to become this shopping mall. It's going to do this. It already is a shopping mall. Soho, when you go to Soho, it's wealthy restaurants. It's wealthy clothing stores. It is gorgeous. It's really beautiful. But this idea that it can't change or that it shouldn't change or that we have to wait for this perfect rezoning plan is, to me is not realistic. This is not realistic. And everybody has an opinion about it. And I will tell you my opinion about it. Right now, we have a housing crisis. We are short so many houses. There is a 300,000 person wait for public housing in New York City. What? Yes. Okay. Some people say it's around 200,000. Other people estimate it's around 300,000. That's a lot of people waiting for public housing. Gentrification, New York City, especially in my district, gentrification is happening all the time. And it usually just means people keep getting pushed further and further out of neighborhoods. We have to fix it somewhere. So there was this Soho NoHo debate that's been happening for a while now. I watched some of the debate happen this past weekend about rezoning. And I saw Maloney's testimony. And I got to be honest, it wasn't a very cogent argument. And I even recorded it. I got the transcript for it, some of the highlights. She says this current plan will displace, erode, and impact the lives of rent-protected and lower-income residents in Soho NoHo and the neighborhood and communities, many of whom are located in the 12th district that I'm privileged to represent. And she said the character integrity of the historic district or the affordable housing that doesn't address the displacement. I'm reading it as is, which she said. So if some of it doesn't make sense, it's because it doesn't make sense. Now historic districts are created. She said, she calls this up, there's a lot of loopholes here. And she said, and with all of this new upzoning and housing, as you rightfully pointed out, Madam Chair, she was talking to our borough president, where are the green spaces? Where are the schools? Where's the transportation? I'm going to address that in a second. And the lifting of the restrictions of the oversized something. And then she says, retail, oversized retail stores are going to push out small businesses. Okay. Let me address a couple of things in this. First of all, the big businesses are already in Soho. Oh my God. So what are you talking about? Small businesses. Soho isn't like this cute mom and pop store. That's not what, I'm befuddled. I'm truly befuddled. It's, you know, okay. The other point I want to mention is that she discussed where's the transportation. Soho is a transportation hub. It has some of the best transportation there. You just walk a couple of feet, you're at that subway. Walk a couple of feet that way, you're at that subway. It's fabulous. That's what's wonderful about Soho. It's wonderfully convenient for everybody. You know, New Yorkers actually have 1/3 of the carbon footprint than other cities do because of the transit that we have in New York. That is fabulous. So one of the things that I think that Maloney is saying, and really, I really want to get to the root of why she's saying this. A lot of the people that live in that area, and I watched the 5 hours of this testimony, a lot of the people that live in that area are wealthy, and the majority of them that had a problem were people that were white people. You know, I saw maybe a brown person or two have an issue in it, but it was mostly white people that were like, I don't want them coming into my neighborhood. And by the way, can we stop with that? I'm really tired of people saying, you know, these really, really wealthy people saying this is my neighborhood, like as if there's no room for anybody else, right? Because when wealthy people move into my neighborhood, they automatically claim it as their neighborhood. Okay, so let's just say that for the start, that there should be room for people to move into Soho. She's saying that people are going to leave Soho. Well, we're adding more housing because of mandatory inclusion. You have to create a certain amount of affordable housing. And right now, this is estimated to create 900 new affordable homes in Soho. 900 isn't a lot, but it's a lot more than zero. Let's talk about that. There's 900 new families that could move into some affordable housing in Soho. So that's another good part. Then she talked about the green spaces. Sure, we could create more green spaces. I'm more concerned at this moment about creating homes. I think we can do both, but we shouldn't say we're not going to do this rezoning plan because there's not enough green spaces. So we're going to deny creating homes because we got to wait to get some green spaces going on. So to me, and then I'll say this, she says this plan will destroy the voices of the community. And I want you to know who the voices are. They're mostly 80% wealthy white people. Those are the voices of the community. I'm not excluding the brown people that live in this neighborhood, black people that live in this neighborhood, the Asian people. I'm centering them because there might be more opportunity there for us to move back into that neighborhood if we do this plan, which is not a perfect plan, but it's better than nothing, right? This plan will destroy the voices of the community. I also joined with their voices and being opposed to this current rezoning for Soho NoHo, and I object to the rush of this, the last minute, especially as most people are out of town. Okay, let me address that for a second. So Maloney is like, why are we voting on this right now? Everybody's out of town. Well, guess what? Wealthy people are out of town. I'm not out of town. I'm in town. Why? Because I'm not wealthy. This is another thing that Maloney isn't thinking about right now. She's like, we're not going to be able to vote right now because all of the people that are in the Hamptons can't really have their say in this. I mean, ridiculous. We can't vote on this right now because everybody's out of town. No, the wealthy people are out of town right now. Okay? And then let me talk about the hearing. Let me talk about why this process has already been difficult. I want to attach one moment. I want to attach voting caucuses to public hearings for a second and why they don't work really well. When you have a public hearing like what we've had for Soho NoHo, the people that tend to come out tend to be wealthier white people that have time to sit there for hours and talk about why they're frustrated about what's going on. The similar thing happens with caucuses, right? It tends to be whiter people, non-disabled people that are able to be there for hours and talk about things that are going on. And what ends up being left out are people, Black people or people of color who may not be able to join in on this discussion because they're at work, right? So there's a certain amount of privilege that's going on here, okay, with the hearing. So I do feel like some voices were left out about it. But when I look at how this city is this proposal for the city, it's not the worst thing. There's things that could get fixed. And one of the things that they said is that maybe the office spaces might be too big, and it might create less housing that way. I I'd say one of the other things that I was excited about, let me talk to you what I'm excited about. This rezoning plan is really good for artists, And this is something that's really missing from the conversation. Well, there's two things missing from this conversation. People keep talking about affordable housing, but they're not talking about affordable and accessible housing. I don't hear anything about accessible housing, right? Because we know that disabled people in New York are having a hell of a time finding affordable and accessible housing. So that is missing in the conversation. But what's also missing in this conversation, and where Maloney and I very much differ, is that I'm actually wanting to see this happen because it would help artists. There is a massive artist component to this. And that, to me, is really exciting. And something that she didn't mention at all, she's saying they're going to displace artists. What starving artists are living in Soho right now? I've lived in New York City for almost 2 decades. I have gone to Soho to get drinks. I've gone to Soho to eat. I've never been able to afford to live in Soho. Never been able to afford to live in Soho. So, and I know a ton of artists in New York City. I don't know any starving artists in Soho. Maybe there is one who is in one of the affordable housing in Soho, but that's not what's really happening here right now. But what could happen through this rezoning and the artist element is that you could actually bring more artists back in. And I've said this many times, if you're going to call New York City the culture capital of the world, you have to actually support artists. This new plan for Soho NoHo would allow not just more galleries, but more workspaces for artists to be there. They will be able to have like this, a new Shakespeare company to be there. I'd like to see even more happen with that, because Soho is never going to be what it was in the 70s. The type of zoning that happened there when it was an industrial place, the type of zoning that was marked for it then, that doesn't exist now, right? And in order to live there as an artist, to get a work live space, you had to get certified, right? And at least 300 people, I think it was 300 people a year would apply for it. Well, only 10 people apply for that a year now. If that, I'll double check those numbers. So you don't really have artists living in Soho like that anymore. And I know that a lot of people want to go back to the good old days of New York. I mean, that's never going to exist right now. What we have to do right now is to make sure that we have housing for every single person that needs it. We need to make sure that we have accessible housing for everyone that needs it, affordable housing for those that need it. And if we have to start it with 900 houses here, 600 houses here, I think there needs to be more subsidies on apartments that already exist. I think there needs to be subsidies on spaces where artists are already working. I think that there's lots of solutions here. And I will tell you this, in this entire thing that Maloney said in her speech, when she was talking about small businesses and retail shops and stuff, not once did she mention solutions. And that, to me, is my issue here. Not once does she mention solutions for what she'd like to see. Just saying things like, where are the green spaces? Where are the schools? That's not a solution. I'm telling you what some solutions are here. We need to think about upzoning as one of the tools, not the only tool, because it doesn't create all of the affordable housing that we need. But getting rid of it, saying we're not doing upzoning. And Maloney has said, categorically, we're not doing upzoning on the Upper East Side. We're not doing it in Soho. When she's categorically saying things like that, that means she's removing at least 1,000 pieces of affordable housing without offering a solution. But why would she do that? Well, she's doing that because a lot of her neighbors, a lot of a lot of her donors don't want it. Which means her donors and her wealthiest constituents are determining what the rest of us get. And I don't think that's okay. And I said this on Twitter, and I'll say it again. My district, New York 12, is the third most unequal district in the United States right now. If you're white and in my district, you have a 7% chance of living below the poverty level. If you're black and in my district, you have a 1 in 3 chance of living below the poverty line. 1 in 3. Okay? This is an unequal district. And Maloney is paying lip service. And she's doing the bare minimum. I know that there were some people that gave me ish. I'll say ish in case there's kids watching. There were some people that gave me some ish this week saying, I cannot believe you would dare, that you would deign challenge a representative. This decision was not made lightly. I've lived in her district on and off for 18 years, literally. Grand Street, Lower East Side, East Village, Greenpoint. I've been in her district. I know it, and I know the people in it. And the things that we talk about and the things that we're frustrated with, some of them are state issues, some of them are local issues, and a lot of them are federal issues. Okay? And what I've seen, and one of the things that I went to a Bangladeshi meeting, and I watched Maloney give this group 2 congressional certificates for their work in helping to eradicate food insecurity in their area. 2 congressional certificates, 2 pieces of paper. They don't need that piece of paper. It's nice. They need money for their district to make sure that they're not dealing with food insecurity. And it's time that Congress stop doing things like that, right? Unless our certificates come with money to aid, aid food insecurity, we shouldn't be paying lip service to people like that. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of watching organizations after organizations do all this work that really should be taken care of by the federal government. And then just getting things like a certificate or a crock pot, like when she delivered crock pots to Queensbridge. Nice gesture, right? I'd rather see that public housing, that NYCHA get fully funded, because it would be a massive investment into something that we could use over and over and over again in the years. The one time to pay it off, to bail it out, to do all the repairs, we would never have to spend that much money again after doing it. We would spend money to repair, to keep it repaired, to keep it in order. But to me, it's like, why not propose that bold housing? Why not propose bold housing reforms? She hasn't done it, and she's never done it. If you go through and you look at Maloney's policies and you start really looking at it, you start saying, she's only really proposed one piece of environmental legislation in 30 years. Well, how she supported artists? Look at her artist policies that she's proposed, that she's introduced. Couple pieces, all about, women's museum stuff, nothing to help local artists, nothing to make artists' lives easier in our district. There's a ton of artists in our district. I know, I'm one of them. So a lot of the stuff that she is putting in is really lip service. And this is something, and I'll say this again, one of my favorite representatives is Rep. Lauren Underwood. She's my brother's representative in Illinois. And she said, and I think this is so perfect, I'm paraphrasing, she said, you think that when you go into Congress that you're going to be proposing that the congressional members work on the most important issues of the day. That's just not true. What we do is, as individual members, we're bringing things that we find important to the floor. And it's so clear to me, and it has been for quite a while, that Maloney is just out of touch what the district needs, what we're desperate for, and what is going on here. And I know this because I've seen her give talks in the district. I've gone to them and I've watched her kind of say things, do a quick hi, do some photo op. She did a photo op with me, and I smiled. And then she goes back to DC, and she said, and she shows, I've done my due diligence. I gave them a talk, but I don't think that she's really listening. I want that to be clear. Because if she was really listening to the things that we needed right now, she would understand that my district is dealing with massive amounts of isolation. There's a mental health crisis in my district right now. There's a housing crisis in my district right now. There's a food insecurity issue in my district right now. There's a public health safety issue in my district right now. And I'm not seeing her propose any of those policies. And I'm going to leave you with this. One of the things that I get really frustrated about is when you look at through her policies. I've looked through all of her policies. I've actually watched all her C-SPAN videos too, okay? When you look through all her policies, when you look through her C-SPAN, you look at the things that she's done, you will see that only in the last couple of years has she decided, I need to kind of like show my progressive accolades here, right? I need to show people what I can do, because in the last minute, she's been like co-signing the Crown Act, like she never did that before. There's been a bill every year introduced to study reparations. Like, what would reparations look like for Black people in America? She's never signed on to that. Now she's like, oh, I'll sign on to that. Years never signed on to it, right? So things that would help Black people or Native people, all last minute. Now she's co-signing everything. And by the way, co-signing is like a bare minimum thing you can do in Congress. Okay. It's really about what you're introducing, what you're bringing to the floor, what is allowed to bring to the floor, but it's really about what you're proposing or what you're even talking about. I mean, when she's talking about health issues, she's never really going into weathering, like discrimination and how it affects Black bodies and brown bodies, and how we need to take that into account when we're discussing healthcare. She's not talking about ableism that happens in our healthcare system and how we have to address that. She's not talking about transphobia in our healthcare system and how we have to address that. Survivors, she's talked about a tiny bit. I'm going to talk about survivors more through my campaign, and it'll be clear why later. But there's lots of things that she's just not talking about. And you know why? Because it's out of her purview. It's just not something that is kind of natural for her. Okay. So to me right now, people said somebody said today, are you a YIMBY, right? And I will actually leave you with this. There's a saying like YIMBY or NIMBY, like yes in my backyard or no in my backyard. And I told a friend of mine that I'm not really like a YIMBY as much as I am. I have the initials here because I DM'd it, but I'll just say it. I'm more of a INOL, which is it's not our land. And I'm more of a GUASYGF, which is grow up and share, you greedy effers. Because to me, that's another part. New York, people in New York who are really wealthy really think of New York as their playground, that it's their land, that it's their space, and that we just need to figure out where we need to go. And those are the people that Maloney is favoring. I'm sorry, but it's true. And so to me, I want to tell the people in my district, I'm sorry, you're going to have to figure out a way to share this place that we're all temporarily on, this land that we're all temporarily on. We need to find a way to make room for everyone to be here, to make the fabric of New York something really special. Really. And that's the thing that I'm really excited about, that we have a lot of opportunities to make New York really exciting and not this boring suburb. I mean, no hate to suburbs, but right now, New York has it as it is. Like when you go to Soho, I don't really feel a culture there. I feel that it is a really expensive store with some cool people, a couple cool people that live there. It's okay to do change. New York has always changed. It will continue to change. We have to embrace it, especially if it's going to include more artists. It's going to include more affordable housing. It's going to include more accessible housing. Okay? Love to you all. Reform the filibuster. I'll talk to you all next week. Bye.